All right, folks. Well, we are going from, once again, we're transitioning from one section of Genesis to a new part of the story. So I'm really excited because Jacob's one of my favorite people, and we get the very beginning of his story. But before we get there, we have to tie up some loose ends. So this really is one of those transitional chapters where we're moving from one part to another. And this is kind of where I disagree with the person who numbered where the chapters hit, because I feel like we should have like a chapter of tidying up and then hit Jacob, but Jacob is kind of, or Jacob and Esau are kind of, you get the beginning of their story in this chapter. So let's go ahead and dive in. We get some juicy details about Abraham at the very beginning. What do you all think with even the very first sentence of chapter 25? Abraham took another wife.
Yeah. What was he thinking?
Well,
Wasn't enough trouble the first time around.
well, and at his age.
So this is one of the areas where the number of people's ages, the general idea is there's not a consistent aging system throughout the intro of Genesis. There are some that describe like this area. If you chop people's age in half, it makes a lot more sense.
Mhm.
So
He lived to be 175.
yeah, so cut that in half. It's much more reasonable. If instead of Isaac being married at 40, he gets married at 20.
Yeah.
Certain things kind of slot better into place. And you can imagine Abraham having many more children if he's not over 100, but maybe more in his like 60s and 70s.
Mhm. Yeah, because it sort of sounded like Rebecca was brought up there, when Isaac was a young man. You'd think he was a young man. Well, what did they do all that time before they got married? Did he wait 20 years? It was a long engagement.
Well, he was right after his mother died. The numbers don't add up.
No.
Yeah, no.
He needed comfort after his mother died. Well, his mother died when she was 125. That would have made him only, that she had him at 95. I don't. Yeah,
Well,
we don't count.
All that to say, it's sometimes better not to try to make the ages make sense. They just don't, unless you really believe people are living superhumanly long. At any rate, we get the fact that Abraham now has a third wife in a way. We get kind of a lot of her children and some of this is once again almost more like setting up a map. In the notes we're describing the meaning of some of the children of, I actually don't even know how to say her name, and my dyslexia is just telling my brain, don't say it. So
Keturah?
Keturah?
I don't know. Something.
All of the names of those children are locations. Those are different tribes of people. So once again, we're getting kind of the mythological origin of a bunch of people. The two sons pulled out is Jokshan, father of Sheba. That is an important place later on. And so we see how kind of this is one of the places where you kind of wonder if the people in the future are writing a little detail to kind of orient a different group of people as to the significance of this. So he's father of Sheba, which is in the Nubian desert, south of Egypt, where the Queen of Sheba comes from. And the Queen of Sheba approaches King Solomon. And they have an interaction. This is also the location that a lot of Discovery Channel documentaries say is the current location of the 10 Commandments. that's a whole other deep dive into some archaeology. You can't prove it, but so that is kind of the origin of those people. And then you have another location, the son of Midian. Midian, if you remember, is where Moses goes and flees. And so you have the development of the people of Midian that come into play in the story of the Exodus. So you kind of have these place markers, and the claim is Abraham's the father of all of them.
Okay.
All of these rich people. And so we kind of get her descendants and the setup of all the people that Abraham is evidently the father of over there. But they're not the chosen people. We get another juicy detail in verse 6, where we kind of get this is like where we get the questionable status of some of the Abraham's two alternative wives, where they're referred to as wives and concubines. So no matter what, Sarah is still the primary wife. Lastly, we get like this weird episodicness where we then get the death of Abraham, and then we get Ishmael's descendants and his lineage, where once again, those a lot of those names are tribes of people, and they're setting up kind of the map on the other side. So that's more of like the Arabian desert side, which is why the Muslim tradition kind of latched onto that story, is that orients us to that side of the people that are more nomadic herdsmen over there. And we get 12 kind of prince-like people of the tribes in the Arabian desert. So notably, these are two different groups of people. They're both seen as Arab, but you have more of the Egypt side of things, which is seen as mercantile trade rich. And then you have a pastoral side on the other side, but Abraham's father of them all. So gonna pause there. We can come back to the death of Abraham, but what do we think about kind of all of these descendants that are much bigger than just Isaac? But we have this whole map of descendants now.
Okay, when they're following the lineage in the New Testament, are they following straight up the line through Isaac to Abraham? Or does it get muddy as all of these other descendants also trace back to Abraham, but not through Isaac?
So the biblical lineage will follow with the blessing. We'll see this come into play with Isaac and Jacob, or Jacob and Esau. Sorry, my names are getting all mixed up. Jacob and Esau, you will notice a similar thing happening. The key element is, where is God's blessing? Where is the line of God's blessing that's going to be a through line? And so the genealogies that you find in Matthew and in Luke, they are connecting Jesus to King David, and then from King David to Abraham. And the idea is that there is a lineage of blessing that is kind of, I mean, I guess a way to think about it in a more modern sense. I know my mom's family loved genealogy way before Ancestry.com. And what I noticed is that the family tended to follow some lines of our history more than others. Because you have exponentially more great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. But my family always loved the lines that traced us back to interesting things. And so I was told I was 100% English, and I'm not. I'm nowhere near 100% English, but because the lines that we could traced us back to England, we kind of just followed those few that we could follow. So that's kind of more of a modern understanding. If you know that you have in your family history that like one relative and they are kind of given undue importance in your family tree than other people. Does that make more sense? Does that make sense? Kind of.
Well, I just would have predicted that the lineage would have gone through Isaac to Abraham. And so this blessing thing, I'm hoping we're going to discuss later.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll let it go.
Okay.
The book that our companion book said that the people at the time would have read all of this as geographical, and that it was telling us, it was explaining things. So it was explaining why things the way they were. So they just took that for granted. We don't read it that way. And that's, of course, it says Jacob Israel. So you get a clue there that they're connected, but
yeah,
we really think of them as people, and they weren't thought of as people. They were thought of as geographical places.
Yeah. This is where Genesis, once again, is kind of muddling where history begins and mythology, where the division between history and mythology. Because, yeah, this is kind of, once again, it kind of dips down into where's the mythological origin of these things. And the people that will become the nation of Israel kind of have this, it kind of inflates their egos to be like, oh, we're this tiny kingdom, but our patriarch was the father of your nation. And so you can kind of see the ego building there, where their influence is kind of felt. The other way you can think about it is some of these places are the places with good trade relations. So notably, how much better they speak about some places versus like when we saw the mythological origin of like the place that Cain goes to, it's like, boo, we don't like those people. Or the Noah's son, the one they don't like, is like, boo, we don't like the people that came from them. But here it speaks well of these places. So it's like, yay, we do like these places. We can trade with these places. So it's orienting, but also kind of solidifies the general idea of how well we look upon these specific tribes. Are these tribes of Abraham? Good, we can trade with them. So, yeah, this is all information that I think is interesting, but it's not really useful in our context, but it's kind of almost fossilized in our text because it was very important to the people who were reading it, the like original audience. It would be very important to them, but now we're like, what do we do with this? We have an oral map, thanks. So let's jump back a few verses, go back to 7 and talk a little bit about Abraham's death. Once again, this is kind of just tying up some loose ends because we're going to transition to the next part of the story. So we have the length of Abraham's life. He breathed his last, and we get this nice little epitaph here that he was a good old age, an old man full of years, and he was gathered to his people. So this is where it's kind of noted that, especially in the first 5 books of the Bible, there is no mention of an afterlife. Your goal is to live a long and good life. And Abraham succeeded in that. He lived a long life. He was a good old man, and he died, and he was gathered to his people is kind of the idiom to say, like, he passed away, as we often use that phrase instead of he died. He was gathered to his people, and we'll see that on and off through the text. That is just a common idiom to mean he was put in the ground. But we do have the other detail that comes back around. Thank you to the priestly source that plugs in that he was buried next to Sarah. We get this small little reunion of Isaac and Ishmael. They come together and they bury Abraham with Sarah. pausing there for any details, any curiosities that you all noticed.
I would like to go back to 6.
Okay, go for it.
Well, we haven't mentioned the fact that Abraham had concubines, first of all. And they were given gifts while he was still living. So I'm guessing the gifts were from him. And he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. Why?
So what we have here, so even my additional text at the bottom says, this is kind of weird how it says concubines here. Is this referring to there are more women, or is it real, or is it this kind of intermediate status of Hagar and this other one, Keturah? Like, are they kind of like wife concubines? Like, they're providing a service, but they are very much not being elevated to Sarah status. So sometimes it doesn't help that in Hebrew, the word for woman and the word for wife are the same. There is no designation for an unmarried woman. Only a young unmarried woman, because a young unmarried woman is called a virgin. It doesn't matter about her sexual history. That's just the term for a young maiden. A woman is a wife, interchangeable, and so they get called a wife, and sometimes it means that they have this elevated status. Sometimes it's just referring to this is Abraham's woman, and so it seems like they're in this intermediate status of both wife and concubine.
Okay, but going on, he sent them away from Isaac with gifts. Why did he need to send them away while he was still living?
So this is kind of a repeat of what we saw before with Ishmael, that Abraham is not leaving them unprovided for. So he's giving them gifts while they're alive. So they have no claim on the estate once he's dead, basically. And he's sending them away because, where was it?
6.
It literally says that Isaac inherits everything. So Isaac gets everything. You don't get a claim to the estate because you got gifts while I was alive. I gave you what I wanted. The rest is going to Isaac.
Okay.
So we see, I mean, we've been talking about family business and keeping it together. This is kind of a way to prevent the family estate from being broken apart. I gave you your starter flock, now go away.
Okay.
Doesn't sound like Abraham's too sentimental, does it?
No.
All right, then the last detail I want to pull out from this is verse 11. After the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled in Beraloi. So we see that the covenant, the blessing in the covenant, which is going to be huge in a moment and fought over, this blessing only transfers to Isaac once Abraham dies. Abraham dies, it transfers. Notably, Isaac is not the firstborn, he is the secondborn. Am I getting an echo once again?
Yeah, we surely are.
Okay, I know it's annoying, but if it's one of the things, if we click ourselves on and off mute, it should fix the problem. So I know it's annoying to do, but if you want to talk, just click yourself off. So.
Do you want us all to mute? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If All right. Sorry about that. I know it's a hassle. Anyways, yeah, so the blessing is going to be in flux here for a little bit of who gets it. So now we have officially seen that Ishmael has fully been sent off, and now the blessing has officially transferred to Isaac, and Isaac is now the patriarch. He is the bearer of the covenant. So that's why we kind of talk about the lineage of the blessing, is because the blessing kind of denotes if you have patriarch status. And so we then jump into the Jacob narrative. We see some repeats of prior things, but we're kind of going to go through hyperspeed with the Abraham and Sarah story. We see very quickly that Rachel is barren. They pray, and that one's resolved so fast. So unlike the chapters and chapters of being kind of in flux, Rachel's barrenness gets solved, at least in the narrative, really quickly. So why include it if it's resolved so quickly? Like, because this is pulling weight. There's a reason why. Why do you all think that Rachel will be described as barren and then they pray and then it's fixed? So feel free to click yourself off mute to comment.
And the question is, why did it get fixed so fast?
Why include it at all if it's going to be like, if the problem appears in one verse but also disappears in one verse? Like, what is this doing in the narrative?
It may be implying the necessity of some sort of external intervention, probably from God. In other words, the fact that she didn't just have a couple of kids, which anybody could have done, indicates that no, this took more than that. This was not simply a regular birth.
And she was also older when she had the babies. 40, I think. She was, yeah. So it accounts for that, but it's probably just repetitious. I mean, a lot of the stories, there's another story, I don't know if it's in this chapter, the next, where they go someplace and is it Isaac that lies about his wife? It's the same story.
That's coming up. So, but Mary Ellen, what's up?
Well, this passage to me just indicates like the ongoing difficulty of birth. Sarah had trouble conceiving. Now Rebecca had trouble conceiving. And the fact that she had such a difficult pregnancy, and it says in here somewhere that, let me see, hang on. The children struggled together within her. Kind of sets up the future of these two boys, that they have been struggling with each other from conception, not just as, difficulties happened during their young years and went their separate ways, that the whole difficulty of getting pregnant, of the difficulty of the pregnancy, and the struggle of the twins in the womb, to me, is really significant.
Yeah, go for it, Clay.
I just thought it was the fact that Isaac must have descendants. It's very important that he have them. So the fact that she wasn't getting pregnant and he prayed to the Lord, I need descendants. That's how it hit me.
Yeah, so a lot of commentaries will bring up like all of these different things so Isaac has the blessing, and he kind of already is kind of following in the footsteps of his dad. Sue, you kind of gave us a little bit of a snapshot of what's to come, but yeah, he repeats some of the things that Abraham did, for better or for worse. So yeah, this is kind of a repetition of that same narrative. But you also get the kind of the specialness that was with Isaac's birth, where Isaac was kind of set apart because he was kind of an angel baby. He was the baby that couldn't happen because God had to make it happen. We have a little bit of that here, that these two are set apart because, Larry, as you were saying, these aren't just your average kids. These are kids that God made happen. So because God made these two happen, special things are going to come of it. But Mary Ellen, I think you're also right in that some pregnancies are just tough, and like it's reflects some women's experience that like, yeah, you have trouble getting pregnant and the pregnancy is not an easy one, and there's just trials that you're going, like some of this is just description of people's experience. But then Clay, yeah, there's also the, once again, part of the covenant is the question of descendants, so we're gonna pray to make it happen. And so like all of these things are in the works and they can all be true at once. Which is why it's there, like it's signaling something, even though it's a problem and an immediate solution here. So Rachel's barrenness gets solved lickety split, no hassle of concubines or secondary wives. She just gets what she wants, except for the fact that now we have these two babies who are struggling in the womb. So let's talk about the twins who are evidently rolling in her belly. We have this kind of prophecy to the Lord. We don't know exactly where it comes from. It's just like this, almost a narrator voice that pops in saying, 2 nations are in your womb. They will be born and they will be divided. Unlike previously, where it's like we have good trade relations with these other people, these two will not get along. One shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. I feel like in our modern day, we think of twins as being like more on the same tier. We don't really think of like, I've heard twins that are like, oh yeah, I'm the older one. And then they laugh, like being the firstborn doesn't hold that weight. But we see here that there's still a lot of significance of literally being the first one into the world. So what's coming up? There's a lot of puns. This is when you realize that the Hebrew people really loved puns because they're all over the place. There's so much wordplay in specifically Jacob and Esau's names. So they're rolling in the belly, almost like fighting for like which one's gonna come out first, but Esau wins. He comes out red and hairy, both words that are related to the name Esau. So like Esau has both, like you can see how the etymology is connected to the word red, but you can also see how it's connected to the word hairy. It's a pun on a pun on a pun. So he erupts out first, but then Jacob is like literally like holding on as if he's like trying to drag him back, and this comes out at like, that had to be a painful 1-2 birth because they're not waiting for each other. They're literally both trying to get out. And Jacob's name both means like the one who strives, and it's related to the word ankle. So they kind of named their son Ankle because he was holding on to the ankle. Once again, his name is a pun. But we have that a very dramatic birth scene. Let's pause there and talk about how they even entered the world. We have Jacob and Esau already duking it out. What do you all think of these two? Just initially out of the gate.
Red and hairy is pretty unattractive.
So I said they're in competition with each other from the get-go. You know, struggling for primary position, whatever. And the younger one is very feisty. So.
Yeah, we see him struggling from the get-go. going a little bit further, like in verse 27 and 28, we get the personality differences. We really see that they're knocking heads even from their entry, but they have very different personalities too. And yeah, so red and hairy is not the fun description. It wasn't as stigmatized, or like it actually described a people group, because we'll see that Esau is the father of the Edomites. More about that later. But we see Esau's kind of like your man's man. He's like in the field, he's hunting, he's like that macho, yeah, big, strong, buff jock guy. And Jacob is a man, quiet man living in the tents. He is seen as like the more cultured of them. We see him cooking, we see him kind of in he's actually feminized in the text because he's in the women's sphere. He's kind of not living up to the man's man reputation that Esau is. And so we have their conflicting personalities. And it comes out in this little story that we get at the end of the chapter, which let's spend the rest of the time kind of talking about what's going on here. But we have the birthright, which is not the blessing. The birthright is about the property, literally inheriting the family business. And we have Jacob, who is cooking, once again, kind of effeminate. He is kind of filling the woman's role. He's kind of acting like a daughter here. Esau comes in, says, huh, I'm famished. And the words, even in Hebrew, are very curt. They're very short. They're very like, huh, I'm man, I caveman, give me food. And when he says, give me some of that red stuff, the Hebrew is really funny because, once again, this is all pun. The way you emphasize something is you say it. And so he's saying, give me red, red. Give me red, red. But all of those words sound very much alike. Where is it? If I could get the Hebrew, I'd actually say it to you. Hadom, Hadom, Hazah. Hadom, Hadom, Hazah is literally what he like comes in and it's like, Hadom, Hadom, Hazah. Red, red stuff, give me. And we have Jacob, who is already scheming, who sets up a barter and says, give me your birthright. Remember all that Abraham is bartered, and they go back and forth and back and forth. And Esau is just like, I'm hungry. Okay. And then just like sells his birthright off. And Jacob even is smart enough to make him swear by it. And so you have kind of the meat and the brains. So what do you all think of this initial story where we see not just them struggling, but you see their personality set up? We're given the fact that Esau's loved by his dad, Jacob's loved by his mom. We kind of have this whole rivalry set up, and this is stage 1, act 1. It's playing out. What do we think?
Well, Jacob is dealing from a disadvantage because he's second born. Okay. But he's also obviously a schemer. And he is going to get his due, even though he supposedly is second. You know, he's trying to make first.
Yeah, it's interesting that his father does not favor him, even though he ends up being his son. Everything.
I was just saying, Mary Ellen.
Okay, it sounded like you were muted. I'm kind of caught up with the details here. Really, you would give up your birthright for stew? That's for the manly guy, to give up everything because he's hungry. I mean, he's a big enough man. He could have just taken it.
So what does that say about him? Exactly, like he's very obviously the bigger, stronger of the siblings. What is this kind of implying about Esau?
Well, Esau says, look, I'm starving. What good is my birthright? To him, you know, it's not worth anything. Sure, go ahead, have it, you know, it's not doing me any good.
When he says, I am about to die, is he just doing a hyperbole on how hungry he is? Okay. Yeah, when I read that, I thought, how does he know he's about to die? Now that explains it better, that he was just hungry.
One piece of the commentary connected Esau, how Isaac and Esau are similar. We get the note that his dad loves him because he hunts and gets him wild food. So we see that his dad is thinking with his stomach. He's like, I like this son. He brings me good food. And we immediately see what kind of person he is. And yeah, like he's probably been in the wild hunting for a while. He is probably pretty hungry.
Hungry.
He's probably not gonna die, but that says something about how Esau thinks. If he's kind of thinking more with his stomach than with his head. So what are some of the other details? Because this story is loaded with them. Well, what are some of the other details you notice with how these two interact with each other? We do have that hyperbole, and so we get a little bit of Esau's thinking when he says, what good is my birthright if I'm dead? Is that good logic? Is that bad logic?
Bad logic.
I'm thinking that Esau was a man of action, not a man of great intelligence, where you have Jacob who takes the opportunity, throws it out there. Okay, brother, you know, you want my stew? Give me your birthright. I mean, that's not an equal exchange. But Jacob obviously was hungry enough to say, oh, well, what good isn't any good to me anyway? He's not thinking to the future when their father dies and he becomes the patriarch. He's just in the moment. I'm hungry. But Jacob is much more intelligent and much more forward thinking, and took the opportunity. And, you know, his brother's just plain hungry. He'll give anything for it. So,
Larry, what's up? Larry, start over. You clicked yourself on mute.
Now, am I live? Jeez. I think the choice of words is important here. The very last sentence, at least in my version of the Bible, is not that Esau gave up his birthright. It says, thus Esau despised his birthright. Which, you know, said from Esau's standpoint, you know, he could care less about his birthright, you know. So it truly to him isn't worth anything. And giving it up for a bowl of stew is perfectly fine. It's better than what he thinks his birthright's worth.
Why would he despise his birthright?
So how the sentence is formulated, this is once again where it's helpful to jump to other parts of the narrative and see how things are talked about. And the word despised is it should be contextually understood. This is one where it's more like, it's not saying Esau himself looked at his birthright and said, oh, that's awful, I don't care about that. It likely is a commentary that his actions are showing he doesn't care about it. So it's more like the editor saying, like, he despised it because look, if he didn't despise it, he wouldn't have done this thing. And so it's more of a commentary on his action more than like his internal emotional assessment of it. That said, the question is, does Esau deserve the birthright? Because the morality here, I think our modern morality is different than what's going on here. Do you think he deserves it? Do you think the text thinks Esau deserves the birthright?
I don't think he deserves it. And he obviously doesn't care about it, how easily he gave it away, but he doesn't seem, he's not the man who will take responsibility for the community that they're in, for the bigger picture of all the people. He's himself. He's a hunter. He provides. He has one identity, and so the fact that it says Esau despised his birthright, I can see I could read into that he just didn't want any part of doing all those things, and he just wanted to be his own man's man. So he could have felt that it was a burden that he was next in line, that he wasn't wanting to pick up all the responsibility that his father had, and he just gave it up easily because he really didn't care. That's not who he was.
Yeah, Clay, go for it.
Well, I'm looking at the commentary that's at the bottom of my page, and it sounds as though this was all worked to make a point. It says the caricature of Esau as a dull person, easily outwitted on an empty stomach, is intended to explain why Israel gained ascendancy over Edom. So the story, I think, has been worked. The people reading it would have known what this was all about. And that, to me, tells me more about why it was written the way it was, that he would so easily give something up and be so dull-witted. Because it's to explain, it's just in one little story, it's to explain a really big thing, why Israel gained ascendancy over Edom.
Yeah. This is where, like, I love literary analysis, because a story can exist on multiple planes. Because, yeah, this is like the national history of, like, Israel. When it comes up, it is a very small, very backwater kingdom, especially when you understand how the tribes were on all sides. It almost doesn't make sense that this upstart kingdom would actually succeed. So yeah, there's a part of the national story of the first shall be last. And we hear Jesus say that all the time, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. This is kind of the proto formulation of it, of, yeah, we're small, but we're feisty and we'll do it. And we see the development of the national identity beginning here. Even in, like, we will see how, why did I just forget his name? Isaac Wilt's name, like, kind of unceremoniously will become interchangeable with Israel. We can talk about that when we get to it, but we see this national identity developing, and part of it is in Jacob's identity and how Jacob operates. So that is a piece of the story, but I think it can coexist kind of with the very narrative human element of it that Mary Ellen, you kind of brought up. When you were talking, I was thinking of, like, princes and kings, and, like, when you have an heir to the throne and the heir doesn't really want it, but someone else in the family does, or the kid who's expected to take on the family business and the kid doesn't really want to take on the family business. And we see, like, while there's, like, this national identity developing in this story, we also see a very human thing that does happen, that sometimes the expected person to take on a role doesn't want it. Yeah, Larry.
The only qualification for the inheritance is to come out first, you know? I mean, just to be born first. You don't have to have any good qualities or anything. If you're a first one, you get it, period.
Yeah, so Esau's qualification was it's almost implied that he was the stronger one, so he made it out first. So his qualification for being the firstborn is he's strong, but is strong a good persona to have if you're expected to be the patriarch over this small mobile town that we've kind of been having in the back of our heads, that like this is many hundreds of people and many hundreds of sheep. I come back to the question, does Esau deserve the birthright? And what does it say about Jacob that he is smart, but also kind of a trickster? Jacob's, in our modern morality, he's kind of morally ambiguous. We don't have the same kind of reverence towards a trickster character, and we will see Jacob is a trickster. So do we think Jacob deserves the birthright? Was his kind of outwitting his brother, was that good? Was that bad? Is it human? Like, what do we think of Jacob's morality? Yeah, Larry.
Well, he was certainly more nurturing than Esau was. So if, you know, a leader requires certain motherly types of behaviors as well, and Jacob certainly did that.
He
Yeah,
probably
Mary
was a better leader, but yeah.
Oh, Mary Ellen did.
Me? Okay. I wouldn't call it trickster because that has kind of a dirty connotation. I lost the word I was going to use, but maybe a negotiator or that's what a leader has to be. A leader has to see opportunities and pursue them. And when you look at our own government and how bills are passed to Congress, well, I'll vote for your bill if you'll vote for I want a bridge to nowhere. There's an element of trickster, but that's too strong a word for me. I'd say a negotiator and an opportunist. And if he's going to be in charge of this mobile community, I like that word, he needs to have those skills because of how they do that. So I think he's the right man for the job.
I was just looking ahead, and I think trickster will apply when we get to chapter 27. Trickster and maybe also all those other words, but I just I thought, well, I wonder what the rest of the story is, and I'd completely forgotten the rest of the story, and it's in chapter 27, and boy, there Jacob is a trickster. So I think probably all of those apply to him, all those adjectives.
So we stay with Jacob for a long time. Jacob's story is as long as Abraham's. You will notice that Isaac was we kind of passed over him really quickly. We kind of went from Abraham to Isaac or Esau and Jacob. So we'll get a few more stories of Isaac, or not yes, Isaac. We'll get a few more stories with him, but we kind of zoom by him. but hold out your judgment of Jacob. Jacob has a fascinating life, and we can talk about some of his story has echoes in it of himself. He is very witty, he's very smart, he can outsmart people, but we will also see he gets what's coming to him as well in a few different ways. But I did, Sue, I saw you trying to jump in a little bit ago. Do you remember what you were gonna say?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I was thinking about, I was thinking about being a twin and the family mythology about that. And I was born first, and the family mythology was that I was a fighter. And I fought. It was a difficult pregnancy. There was eclampsia, whatever. Anyway, my mother was in the hospital and she had high blood pressure. And I was born first, and I was so worn out that I had to have a transfusion, which my father supplied. And I still don't know my birth. I don't know my blood type. And my sister was just sort of slipped out. And anyway, but she was the fighter. She's more competitive, more accomplished, a real fighter, and I had been thinking about that as we were talking, because I think with twins, people always say, which one of you is the older one? Which one is the dominant one? People are very interested in that kind of thing. The dominant one is, I can't tell you how many times people have asked me, and I don't know why they want to know. But I was the dominant one, even though my sister was the fighter. But
The
so I
other
don't know
thing,
what all that means, but I was thinking about it because because of the mythology that comes with twins, and how people are so fascinated by that.
the other thing is they make no distinction between fraternal twins and identical
Yeah.
twins,
Yeah.
And I would think even in biblical times, they would have been aware that, there are differences in twins, and that,
Of course,
and you'd expect.
especially fraternal twins. Yeah. Mhm. And I would say that Jacob and Esau were definitely fraternal twins.
There is a sense in the ancient world that there's a lot of discussion over twins, because they're like one part magic, one part mystery, one part they happen. Like, they do happen, and different cultures respond to them differently. But there does seem to be like a long-standing fascination with twins. I can't tell you how many studies I read where they really want to study the psychology of twins, because it's like they have identical genetics, but they end up like the same, or they're different. It's always interesting. It's like these two were separated at birth and they have the same, or like X, Y, and Z, or they grew up together and are nothing alike. Like, there's that weird fascination with twins.
Yeah, there is.
But Sue, thanks for sharing your experience. It's interesting, the parallels and non-parallels here. So
my sister never would have sold her birthright.
Oh. So we have this character set up, and so we're gonna see how it plays out over many, many chapters. But you can already kind of tell the text favors Jacob kind of out of the gate.
Really? Oh.
You will see the textual bias, and I think that's just because the biblical lineage does track through Jacob. Esau is kind of associated with Edom, which, in some ways, twins are a really interesting metaphor for groups of people that are really alike and fight all the time.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That this will come up many times, and these two are used as metaphors repeatedly. I mean, a modern example, which I actually find hilarious because I'm not a native Michigander. You know how Michigan and Ohio butt heads constantly, and there's that big rivalry? But if you look at the culture of Michigan versus Ohio versus like the rest of the nation, we are more similar than we are alike, or we're more similar than we are different. The difference between Michigan and Ohio and New York is very big versus the difference between Ohio and Michigan. And yet, because they're side by side, there's that natural rivalry. And we kind of see that with Israel and Edom. It kind of makes sense to talk about them as twins. They are related. It is undisputed that these two groups of people probably intermarried all of the time, but there was a very big rivalry between them. One looked like it was going to ascend to power and the other one did. And so you kind of have these two people groups that will be ruckus next to each other, but it will come back around in the New Testament. So this section is referenced by Paul, which you all know by now if you've studied Paul with me at all, that I'm not the biggest fan of Paul. And one of the things that I actually think was detrimental to the history of Christianity is he compares the Jewish community and the Christian community to Jacob and Esau. This comes up, I think, in Romans, to basically say that the covenant of God was inherited by the Christian community that arrived second on the scene, like Jacob, but basically stole the birthright, which is why a lot of the early Christians were like, we are the covenant people. It's because there's almost an acknowledgement that they usurped the covenant from the Jewish people. At the same time, if you look at things in like the history of religion, not a terrible metaphor, if only because modern day Judaism and modern day Christianity both developed at the same time, side by side. Ancient Judaism looks nothing like modern day Judaism. It developed when the temple was destroyed. And so they really did develop side by side, but they have been rivals and kind of knocking heads ever since. And Christianity, in the history of like world religions, did gain supremacy over Pharisaic Judaism. So the Pharisees are the ones who kind of carried on the Jewish tradition that developed into what it is today. So just know that this metaphor gets used in the New Testament and carried on from there. So that's where we see some of the connections in the story and why it's important to know where it comes from.
Okay, let me say the Paul connected Christianity with Esau
Jacob.
or with Jacob. Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of inflammatory language that is used there that was then taken up and used for anti-Semitic reasons, which is why I always want to bring up how it was used, not just how it appears in text. Basically saying God despised the Jewish people, which I think is a very harmful thing to say. So
yeah.
But with that, we are at time. So was this a good introduction to the Jacob cycle, the Jacob story?
Yes, yeah.
All right. Well, let us pray. Pray out for today. Good and gracious God, God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, but also God of Esau, God of Ishmael, God of all the people of the world. We know that you're active in our lives, and we thank you that you're a God who is present and nurturing and a God who cares about the ins and outs of our lives. But we also know that you are a God for people far and wide across the world. So help us develop a heart that, kind of like the instructions to Abraham, that he was to be blessed to be a blessing. Help us to live into that covenant and that promise that we've inherited, that we too can be a blessed people, to be a blessing in the world. So all people across the world might know your love and your care and your tenderness. and that we might see that truly we are one family, connected through you and through our histories. Whether we get along or whether we butt heads like we see in scripture, Lord, we do have a promise that through you we find reconciliation, not just with our own people, with people across the world, and from our next door neighbors who, in the end, we can see that sometimes we're more alike than we are different. So I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thank you all, and I'll see you next week to carry on.
Okay.